Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars Canon.
Today, I've actually got a cool little reaction video for you. Just recently, about 3 days ago, on StarWars.com, we got an exclusive excerpt from the upcoming novel Shadow of the Sith. As you can see right here, it's got older Luke, older Lando. Basically, from what I was reading, this novel is going to be set about 20 years after the Battle of Endor. However, there's some pretty cool stuff in this excerpt. And again, I am not the biggest fan of the sequel trilogy by any means, nor even the time period that they were working with. However, I gotta say, what I see in this excerpt has definitely got me hopeful that maybe they can fix some of the some of the millions of things that went wrong with the sequel trilogy. Anyway, what I kind of wanted to do here was read this excerpt that they gave us on StarWars.com, and then after I read it, we'll do a quick little reaction. I'll give you my thoughts on the things that we're seeing in this excerpt. Here we can see this is the cover art for the new novel, Star Wars Shadow of the Sith. I think there's a lot of potential here. The cover looks pretty dang cool, right? We got older Luke, Lando, and this figure here in the middle, I'm guessing is Ochi, if you remember from The Rise of Skywalker. That was the Sith assassin who was hunting down Rey, working for Emperor Palpatine. Anyway, let's jump into the excerpt itself. Also, one more quick note here. I'm not familiar with Adam Christopher or any other novels that he's written, but again, just the title and the cover art's already got me pretty interested. There was a bang, more like a thunderclap, and everything went black. The breeze dropped, the air still and warm. Luke took a breath and could taste dry dust on his tongue, and then he realized he wasn't sitting on the Seeing Stone anymore. Tython was gone. He looked down. He was standing now on black dirt, hard-packed, cracked, coated with dust that swirled in eddies around his boots. He looked up. The world was black and dry, the sky dark and filled with roiling black clouds lit by constant flashes of lightning that shorted directly into the ground. If it was day or night, Luke couldn't tell. The place was both light and dark at the same time. The vast, flat plain of black stone lit evenly from a sun that wasn't there. Luke took another breath, the taste getting stronger in his mouth. Already his eyes were drying out. The atmosphere, the ground, the whole place, so old, so desiccated. He knew immediately where he was. He'd been here many times recently, this nightmare landscape of his visions. Only now he knew its name. This was Exegol, the hidden world of Sith only whispered about in ancient texts. A place reachable only with a wayfinder. And by meditation? Luke took a step forward, finding the ground solid and most definitely real under his feet. He walked a small and slow circle, eyes at the horizon. Lightning flashed, lighting the farther reaches of the plain, revealing it to be featureless and dead. The same place as his visions, yes, but this felt different. This felt real. Could he have been transported? Luke frowned, his mind racing along with his heart. True enough, he didn't know the full extent of the powers of the Seeing Stone. He'd researched the place for years, but he had never actually used the stone for its ancient purpose, to commune directly with the Force. He knew himself what a powerful Jedi he had become, what untapped potential he still had within himself despite, or perhaps because of, his years of self-directed, masterless training. Had he done it? He had the holocron, or what was left of it, and the kyber crystals. Was there enough of the holocron data core left for the Seeing Stone to have been able to read it, somehow taking him to where the original owner had failed to reach all those centuries ago? And what about the kyber crystals? They resonated with the Force, their very structure in a natural, sympathetic vibration with it. Were they the catalyst making the journey possible? Was that what the original pilot had tried, combining two very different forms of Sith power to overcome their lack of a true wayfinder? It was then that a far more important question entered Luke's head. Could he get back to Tython? Then he spun, ducking instinctively as something brushed past the hood of his robe, strong enough to shift the heavy fabric over his shoulder. There was nobody behind him. He turned the circle again. He was alone on the plain, the air perfectly still, the caustic, sour taste growing ever stronger in his mouth. Again, something brushing past him, this time with a distinct whoosh of the dry air and the sound of someone's feet scraping along the hard ground. Luke ducked out of the way, moving a few meters from his original position. Looking down, he saw his footprints in the dust. It was hardly an impression, but enough for him to see his own tracks. And the tracks of someone or something else. 2 large arcs, not footsteps, but the signs of something being dragged along the ground on opposite sides of where Luke had just been standing. He looked up slowly to see all around him. There was no place to hide, no rocks, no buildings, nothing. Luke could see from horizon to empty horizon. Lightning flashed, and then he saw it, just for an instant, as it was lit up by the electrical storm. A figure, a fair distance away, perhaps 100 meters, and then it was gone, before Luke could register any features or form at all. "Hello?" he called out, feeling slightly foolish. He tried again. "Who's there?" Again, the sound, louder now, and he felt something physically push his back. He went with the movement to keep his own footing, moved forward farther, then spun around, his hand whipping his lightsaber from his belt and presenting it in one smooth, fluid motion. He paused, feet spread, weight low, the defensive position that was as instinctive, as automatic for him as breathing. Luke was surrounded. They were tall, thin, 9 of them. Nothing more than wraiths, nothing more than shadows. Tall, thin ghosts, their bodies curved and arced in a new wind that had picked up, a wind that gusted across the black plain, changing direction constantly. Luke adjusted his grip on his lightsaber and thumbed the activator. With a searing swoosh, the green blade ignited, illuminating a large circle around Luke and the wraiths, lighting the ashy dust that swirled in the air like a halo. Luke braced himself, because these weren't ghosts or shadows or wraiths. They were very real. With each flash of lightning in the dark sky above, the wraiths were lit as solid, 3-dimensional figures, black-robed, bandage-faced. It was disorienting. Luke narrowed his eyes as he focused, the foes surrounding him flashing between translucent, billowing shadows and solid humanoid figures. Then they began to circle him. They kept the same distance from Luke and from one another as they moved, all of them keeping their front facing this intruder into their world. Luke, balanced on the balls of his feet, fingers adjusting, readjusting on the grip of his lightsaber, was ready for the attack he knew was coming, all the while his mind racing. How did I get here, and how do I get back? And then the wraiths, moving in unison as though some unseen, unheard communication had passed among them, reached into robes that were in one instant eddies of ash, and in the next flash of lightning, a heavy, woven black textile, and pulled out lightsabers of their own. Luke, with his years of experience, years of learning to master his emotions and control his actions, did not allow the sight of these 9 weapons to surprise him, because, of course, they had lightsabers. He was on Exegol, the Sith world, the heart of darkness. He had dared to see into the planet with the Force and was now here, in physical reality, facing 9 embodiments of the dark side who clearly wanted their existence to remain hidden. The race lifted their lightsabers and activated them. Luke didn't so much hear their ignition as feel it inside. The familiar sound somehow high-pitched and distant, a half-forgotten memory rather than an actual physical sensation. The rays lifted their blades, ready to meet Luke's, but they were nothing, mere black outlines against the black figures standing on the black ground under a black sky. But when the lightning flashed, the 9 blades were inverted, a negative flash of white that made spots dance in Luke's eyes. Dazzled, Luke's control slipped for just a moment, and he took an involuntary half-step backward. It was what the wraiths had been waiting for. They rushed at him in silence, their robes of shadow ash disintegrating in the wind as they moved, their whole bodies becoming insubstantial, particulate matter that blew away in the breeze. And then the lightning flashed, and Luke was surrounded by 9 very real, very solid, black-clad figures, swinging lightsabers of blinding, impossible light. Driven by instinct, guided by his connection to the Force, Luke parried the first blows, his lightsaber connecting with his enemies with a familiar, high-energy splash. But with the lightning flash, along with the 9 black-white blades of his enemies, Luke soon found that he was, effectively, fighting blind. His vision nothing but purple spots and red smears. But Luke Skywalker did not panic, did not fear. Deflecting another attack, Luke closed his eyes and let out a breath. He didn't need his eyes to see his enemies. All he had to do was look inward, to feel the Force flow through him, to feel its connection with himself and the galaxy, and all the beings that lived within. I am one with the Force, and the Force is with me. The next attack was parried with perfection. Luke's riposte was likewise a textbook example of the Jedi form. But then his blade passed through nothing. Luke didn't open his eyes, he just bowed his head, spinning on the spot to counter the attacks coming from the other side while he concentrated, trying to enter an almost meditative state so he could press an attack rather than let the Force guide him merely through a passive, automatic defense. And then he faltered. A frown flickered across his face as he reached out with the Force, and there was nothing. No connection, no feeling. It was as though he was still on Tython, on the Seeing Stone, at the center of a grace where the Force coalesced around him, but not within him. The beings around him, 9 shadow race with blades of light and dark, did not exist in the Force. They had no presence, no form. This was impossible. The Force connected all life in the galaxy, but it also surrounded and penetrated the inanimate. Objects, rocks, plants, starships, droids, everything had a presence in the Force, or rather, an absence that could be felt as strongly as if they were living things themselves. But the race were nothing. Luke couldn't sense them with the Force at all. He turned left, then right, lightsaber swinging up, then down, then out, parrying 3 more blows. But blinded and unable to even sense his opponents, he was unable to attack. He might as well just be swinging randomly at the air around him. Which he did. He opened his eyes, squinting against the flashes of lightning and the searing sweeps of the wraith blades, his own green lightsaber the one thing that was familiar, the only color in his nightmare. But that fateful lightsaber could do nothing against the wraiths. He blocked a blow, his eyes and brain beginning to adjust very slightly to the disorienting world around him, and then came in with an attack, high and then low, completely avoiding his opponent's blade. But his lightsaber passed through the wraith, dragging a wake of ash behind it, lit in the glowing green of Luke's laser sword. The wraith didn't even seem to notice. It brought its blade up and Luke parried again, ducked sideways, and parried a blow from his left side, swung the lightsaber to the right to counter another, then carved a series of angled attacks that should have cut the 3 opponents in front of him to ribbons. His blade met no resistance. On the contrary, the wraith directly in front of him stepped into his attack, apparently unaware or unconcerned as to the position of Luke's blade. Luke didn't stop moving. He dodged the shadow blade of the wraith even as he passed through the being himself, the cloud of ash and dust thick around his face, coating his skin, his tongue, filling his mouth with the taste of hot metal. Now, behind the group, he turned and pressed a fresh attack to their rear, swinging his lightsaber left and right, and left again, blocking the thrust of a shadow blade as one wraith turned in a whirlwind of spinning black smoke and brought its weapon to bear. Once again, lightsaber met lightsaber, green light met shadow blade, and Luke could feel the jolt through the hilt of his own weapon, could see the fizz of energy as his blade slid along the length of his enemies before the wraith pulled away in one direction and Luke in the other, both then turning to cut in at a sharp angle. Blade met blade again, this time with a bang of spitting plasma, as though the race were toying with him. One moment their weapons real, the next a shadowed imitation of reality. Sensing this change, Luke's next blow was powerful enough to knock the other blade away, and he quickly made his riposte, straight through the neck and torso of the apparition. Once again, his blade met nothing. The shadow form parted like smoke, even as lightning flashed again, and the being was as solid as Luke's own body. Luke swung again and again and again, sweeping now with his blade with no particular intent or design, except to keep the 9 wraiths at a distance, his focus now not on the fight, but on figuring a way out. The wraiths pressed their attack, Luke's blade passing harmlessly through them. As they got closer and closer, they raised their own lightsabers again, acting together in telepathic union, ready to make their final strike. 9 blades against 1. Luke didn't like the odds, but he braced himself nonetheless. The race attacked, 9 shadow blades held by shadow arms, cutting down at speed. And that was when a new light appeared. Not the white flash of lightning, or the wraith blades as they were lit by the unholy light. Not the green glow of Luke's lightsaber illuminating the ashy ground like a green flashlight. No, this light was pale blue. It shimmered in the air, streaking a little, it swept down, throwing the attackers off in one smooth movement. It was a lightsaber, the blade blue and strong. The hilt was transparent, nothing but a blue glow held in a transparent hand. Luke fell backward onto his elbows and gasped at the pain in his joints, and also in sheer surprise at the sight before him. Standing between himself and the race was another figure, a man in flowing pale robes, his back to Luke, his head hidden under a voluminous hood. The entire figure glowed like soft electricity, bright in this world of endless night. When the lightning flashed, Luke could see the 9 solid race through the form of the man who stood between them and their quarry. Luke's mind raced as he tried to identify the spirit of the Force who had arrived to protect him. Ben? No, it wasn't Ben. The robe, The man's form was the spectral being lifted his lightsaber, holding it high above his head, the blade parallel to the ground. For the first time, the race seemed to take note of their enemy. They backed away, 9 forms huddling together, blades lowered. They were screaming from their blank bandages faces, although Luke wasn't sure whether it was a real sound or just an echo inside his head. It was hard to concentrate on what he was seeing. The way the force reverberated around the figure in blue, his entire vision seemed to buckle around him. The race continued to back away, and then they vanished. Their shadow shapes evaporated into dust that spun away on the last eddy of the dying wind. For a moment, all was still. Then the blue figure turned around, his lightsaber extinguished. Luke pushed himself up onto his elbows. He blinked. It couldn't be. It couldn't be. The blue figure lifted his hood back to reveal the strong, sharp face of a young man, his gaze intense beneath a furrowed brow that was bisected by a straight vertical scar. His thick hair was shoulder length and had a slight wave to it. Anakin Skywalker reached out his hand. Luke took it, and everything went white. I don't know about you, but why wasn't this in Rise of Skywalker? I think this is really what all of us were waiting for in that movie. Frankly, not just that movie. The Last Jedi we were waiting for there too. Anakin's name is not even uttered in the sequel trilogy. Do you guys realize that? He has like 2 very, very subtle spoken voice lines at the very end of Rise of Skywalker when Rey is somehow communing with a bunch of different Force ghosts, which that in and of itself doesn't make a whole lot of sense because only Qui-Gon up to this point had figured out how to become immortal through Force ghost-hood. I don't know what the proper term is. But anyway, beside that, Anakin, who George Lucas has said was the chosen one. He repeatedly said Luke Skywalker was the catalyst that redeemed Anakin, but Anakin himself was the chosen one. He is the central figure of Star Wars, and yet he's completely absent from the sequel trilogy. I'm glad that we're getting this, even though it's in novel form. I just can't help but wonder, why couldn't they just put this in one of the movies? Frankly, just something this simple, just this one scene could have gone a long way to redeeming the sequel trilogy in the eyes of not just the original trilogy fans, but also the prequel trilogy fans. Anyway, I'm glad they're finally bringing Anakin back. Again, this whole thing is a little tricky because as we see up here at the beginning, Luke is not actually on Exegol. I mean, maybe he is. He himself is not really sure. However, it sounds like he was on Tython using the Scene Stone, which is how Grogu actually communicated with Luke in The Mandalorian. Right here, Luke's not really even sure. Is he on Tython? Does he have to get back there? Is this a Force vision? Personally, I think this is a Force vision. He recognizes the place as Exegol. Clearly, he's been looking for it. He's been reading about it in the ancient texts, but he's never been here before, and it sounds like he was meditating on Tython and then had a Force vision that transported him to Exegol. And, you know, people are going to say, well, he's actually fighting the race, right? They're like, they may be phasing in and out of corporeal versus incorporeal nature, but even still, he's fighting them. But my response to that would be, yeah, but he fought Vader in the cave on Dagobah. Lightsaber hit lightsaber in that vision, but it was a vision. It wasn't something that was actually happening. It's actually fun that this excerpt just came out because just a day or two ago, I made a video on the 2nd episode of the Book of Boba Fett, where I'm pretty convinced that Boba himself had a Force vision. Remember, the Force is created by all living things. It can influence all living things. Not only Jedi can have Force visions. Anyway, I think Boba had a Force vision, and in that episode that I made, I talked a lot about Force visions in Star Wars Rebels and the Clone Wars, as well as the full-length films. This right here has all the hallmarks of a Force vision. But you know what? I don't even care. Anakin's back. That's what I really care about. Maybe they'll give us some explanation for why Anakin's in this vision, but apparently didn't feel it was important enough to show up in Rise of Skywalker. Maybe something happens. I know, for those of you who are fans of the old expanded universe, or what we now call Legends, in the original Thrawn trilogy, which is called Heir to the Empire, that's the first book, Luke, in one of the very first scenes in the book, actually, Luke is talking with Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Obi-Wan tells him that there's something about the nature of being a Force ghost that makes it harder and harder for him to commune with Luke and other people in the living realm. and he's slowly fading away until finally he says, "This will be my last time where I can speak with you, Luke. You won't see me again. I have to move on." Maybe they're going to go back to that idea. Maybe they're kind of bringing that in here. Anakin was able to talk to Luke. Again, this whole book takes place before The Force Awakens. So maybe Anakin was talking with Luke before the sequel trilogy and then just wasn't able to thereafter. It's a possibility. Again, there's precedent for that in the novels. So I don't know. It's also pretty interesting down here where he says Luke has a holocron, which I don't think we ever saw, right? In all the sequel trilogy movies, we see the ancient Jedi texts, which, you know, Rey stole. That was cool. But anyway, apparently Luke had a holocron. This is different than a Wayfinder, but apparently he's trying to replicate the effect of a Wayfinder. And it sounds like he's actually following in the path of, I think it was a Jedi, right? I think he said that there was a Jedi who'd been trying to use these to find Exegol. Yeah, he's using these and the Kyber crystals to try and figure out where the planet is. Why he wants to go there, I have no idea. Maybe he has some inkling that the dark side isn't totally gone, that it's about to, awaken. It sounds like Luke is actually using a Sith holocron, right? Because right here it says two very different forms of Sith power, talking about both the holocron and the Kyber crystals. For those of you who don't know, holocrons were actually powered by kyber crystals in their core. We get a lot of this in the Darth Bane trilogy, where they explore kind of how a holocron is made, what it does, what it can do, what it can't do. Here's actually pretty cool too, where Luke is trying to fight, essentially like with the blast shield on his eyes, like he was doing with Obi-Wan in the original, Episode 4. It sounds like he's trying to essentially close his eyes because the lightning is essentially like a strobe light, almost blinding him. But he can't even feel the wraiths in the Force. This makes me think really one of two things. Either this is a Force vision, and because they're not real, they're just aspects of the Force, he can't feel them, or maybe it has something to do with the Sith. Essentially, a wound in the Force or a lack of presence in the Force. This actually could tie back into Knights of the Old Republic 2. For those of you who played that game back in the early 2000s, the idea in that was that you could actually create a wound in the Force. Mitra Surik, who is actually the apprentice of Darth Revan, she herself became a wound in the Force where she didn't just cut off her connection, she essentially removed the Force from within her. She was not touched by the Force. This is different than, someone who's just not Force sensitive, because again, like Yoda says, life creates it, right? The Force surrounds and penetrates all living creatures. But in the case of a wound in the Force has no place within them. They're essentially black holes where there is no light, there is no Force. Mitra Surik eventually regained her connection to the Force, but here, I wonder if maybe these are the remnants of ancient Sith lords who are wounds in the Force themselves. Maybe something akin to Darth Nihilus or Darth Sion. For those of you who haven't played Knights of the Old Republic 2, by the way, you got to go play it. The game is fantastic. The story is amazing. And as compared to Knights of the Old Republic 1, KOTOR 2 goes a lot more into the philosophy behind the Force, which, again, some of you may not be into that, but personally, I'm a nerd and I really appreciated that. I'll about do it for this quick video. I don't know about you, but I am actually really excited for this book. I both read the novels as well as listen to most of them on my Audible account. For those of you who don't have Audible, the Star Wars novels are fantastic. The voice actors who they get are top notch. So I highly recommend listening to not just this book, but any of the novels out there. I still have a bunch of questions. Is this a Force vision or is it real? Why does Anakin appear to Luke here but never in the sequel trilogy? Why is Luke trying to get to Exegol in the first place? What's he looking for? All these questions I hope get answered in the book, and frankly, I hope the book can do a lot to repair the damage done by the sequel trilogy. Again, whether you like the sequel movies or not, you can't deny that there were some serious problems with I was going to say the plot, but really it's the lack of plot, the lack of coherent thought behind the whole thing. They had no plan. They've admitted as such at this point. I just hope they can start to make things right. Thanks, guys. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. And until next time, may the Force be with you.